In one of the earliest memories of my mother, I pictured her in the bathroom, sitting on the toilet with a lit cigarette, looking at me with blank eyes hidden by the smoke. Then she devoted herself to her little vice secretly from her husband and children. As far as I know, she has always smoked since she was a girl, and my father kept her company for at least a few years after the start of their relationship. Before smoking became a serious addiction for her, to the point that today she lights her sub-brand cigarette almost every hour, in every place, I think she experienced this weakness as a shame in the eyes of her implacable mother-in-law and her husband, who celebrated his victory over the nicotine by accusing her of his almost drug addiction on every occasion. That day in the bathroom, she didn't even seem to see me. I was stunned, not so much by the penetrating and unbearable smell, as by the fact that for the first time I saw her almost as a stranger. It seemed that she didn't recognize me, that she didn't want me around, that it had happened in my life and not in hers, almost by mistake. There were many moments of absence in our mother-child relationships. More and more after my puberty, my mother claimed her moments of freedom, even if not in words. From time to time she became estranged. Perhaps she thought of the life she was wasting next to a man she did love, who humiliated her as soon as possible, whom she wished were only a beast in her service. I didn't reproach her for having sought an scapegoat in tobacco, only for having completely. I I will never forgive her just because she um, has completely forgot, in conjunction with this octopus that at times abstracted there in the grey and dull world, she having completely forgot having a child like her, abandoned in the clutches of a psychopathic parent. And I'm talking about my father, my dad. My nightmares of abandonment began right around that time, perhaps a couple of years before the start of elementary school. They had constantly, every night without exception, the theme of car racing, sometimes alone, sometimes with my brother, who had just learned to walk. I found myself without knowing how to drive in our car. My screams, cries for help, and pathetic attempts to remind me where the brakes were, were to no avail. I was sure that sooner or later we would end up crashing into a wall of some car ahead. Everything, even that by accident, as long as that race was over. Everything would be okay. Even that, as long as that race ended immediately. Other times I was in the car with my parents, but they thought it best to leave me alone in the back seat without even turning off the engine. The car continued to pick up speed as I, my head bristling with fear, prayed it would crash without hurting myself too much. That was a chain of nightmares that I will never forget because it repeated itself constantly throughout my childhood. When I was older, I imagined having to drive from one place to another in my country, but without having acquired the most elementary notions of how to be behind the wheel. Even after 18 and 20 years old, I dreamed of being alone in the seat driving immense effort. With immense effort, I tried not to hit anyone and not to attract the insults of other motorists. I woke up all covered in sweat, shaking in my bed, and now sure that for no reason in the world, in my entire life, I would have dreamed of enrolling in a driving school lesson to get my license. Paternal teachings. A father for his son is the first teacher, the substitute of the eternal, the builder and the worker who molds the earth under his feet to prevent him from sinking into the habits of existential uncertainty and or aborting, already born, the whirlpool of an immense dark universal uterus. There are children who have never had the luck of having a father, and who all their lives wonder what they would have felt if they had been special, at least for one person in the world, for the parent who gave his contribution to make them born, to make them be born. Of course, even these orphans sooner or later might meet someone on their way who takes care of them, who teaches them about the world, who gives them the strength to face a thousand dangers of existence, and to make the right choices at times, at critical times. There is always someone who replaces his own father when he is missing. Otherwise, an orphan would not survive. In reality, there's much more frightening and unfortunate cases than the one there are much more frightening. There are much more frightening and unfortunate cases than the one I mentioned earlier. The worst thing in the world is not to be fatherless, but to have one that is absolutely harmful to one type of physical development. One who gives you life and then takes it back. One whose greatest enjoyment is torturing one's child like a brat does with the ants and the light. That my father never had the slightest vocation to fatherhood, and like my mother, had married only to adhere to the implicit dues of society, to that absurd convention which requires that every reckless Don Juan at a certain age put his check out out and devote himself to his wife and children is a fact that has already been confirmed several times in these memoirs. The problem arose from the moment in which he always proved to be too cowardly and attached to maternal impositions, to flee when he realized that he didn't want to take on the cumbersome task of raising offspring, or of taking care of a wife who perhaps he had never loved outside beyond a beastly physical and possessive instinct. Trapped in this anomalous limbo between a father angry with fate and an increasingly cynical and frustrated mother, I spent my formative years. I will certainly have received some teachings too, benefited from the moments of good humor of the father, who, even in spite of everlasting of everything, managed to have his outbursts of sympathy and generosity, provided they had fun doing them if he perceived a sexual attachment in me. I still remember his first clumsy teachings with a mixture of sarcasm and amusement, how sharply they differed from those I later read in books, and how perfectly they fit the more famous antagonist figures and other figures of the appendix novel. The main motto that most blatantly guided my father's ethical life has always been cry and complain all the time, because in doing so some powerful person will sooner or later notice you, and out of pity he will throw a loaf of bread at you. Let's continue to talk about my father in the next episode. For now, thank you for watching and see you in the next video.